Hey everyone, welcome to today's seminar. This is Visual Builder Studio and Visual Builder actually new features. My name is Shai Schmelzer and with me is also Laura and Murtaza who will be monitoring the Q&A part of today. If you have any questions during this seminar, there's a Q&A panel as part of the Zoom. Post your questions over there, not on the chat, but rather on the Q&A. And Laura and Murtaza will answer those during the session. We can also try and take some questions towards the end of today. And what we'll be covering today is the new features in Oracle Visual Builder in version 2204, which is releasing this month. So version 2204, officially it's our February release. It's already available for most of the customers who have Oracle Integration Cloud and using Visual Builder as part of that, assuming that you're in the first update window for those services. If you're using Visual Builder standalone, then you should be seeing version 2204 appearing on your environments this week. Again, assuming that you're set as update window 1. As you know, inside Visual Builder, in your tenant administration, you can actually pick which update window you're going to be. We have 2 windows. The second window would probably start in a couple of weeks from today. If you're using Visual Builder Studio, then the features that you're going to see to talk about today are going to appear in your March update of Visual Builder Studio, which will be rolling pretty soon in your Visual Builder Studio environment. In any case, to figure out which version you're on, one option is just play with the tool and you'll see the new features. The other option is always go to the help about part in your interface and you'll be able to see the version list over there. 2204 is the new version, that's the internal name. Just in case you missed it, last month we did a webcast about a version we actually released in December, which was 2201. 2201 was a version that was released only in the VB Studio interface, and there were a couple of very big features in there that are also included, of course, in the 2204. Okay, so those features including things like the fragments capabilities. That's the ability to develop areas in your screen that are reusable across multiple pages, develop basically page fragments that you can then embed into multiple pages, pass information and parameters in and out of those fragments from the containing pages. The other big feature was the data palette. You're going to see it in action today in the demos as well. That's the ability to pick up business objects and services and drag and drop them into the page to create UI components. We also upgraded to Jet 11. We used the stable theme and a bunch of other features that were introduced all in the 2201 version. Now, if you're not using Visual Builder Studio and you're using the designer directly from inside Visual Builder Standalone or from Oracle Integration Cloud, you didn't see those features over the past 2 months, but you will see them now. Okay. However, in today's seminar, we're focusing just on the new features that are purely 2204. So if you haven't seen our previous webcast about the 2201 features, you should also watch that one. It's available as a recorded replay. You can get to it if you go to the Visual Builder Cloud Service YouTube channel. There's a playlist there of the office hours, and you can see all the office hours that we did since the beginning of this monthly broadcast, including the latest one, which covers those features. So make sure to check those out and use them when you're now in version 2204. So with version 2204, just like with any version update, we are updating the client libraries. So there's 2 parts to it, updating the backend servers that we provide, but there's also new client libraries that you can pick up and use in your application. Specifically, we're upgrading to Jet version 11.1.5 with the new features that are available there. And we're also updating the VB runtime to version 2204. One key thing to remember is that the update to use these libraries and this version is in your control. You're controlling when this update is going to take place in your application. So the fact that we're updating the server doesn't automatically update your applications. Your applications continue, published applications continue to run as is with the current version that they are assigned to, not with the new version. And it's up to you to decide at what point you want to uptake the new version and apply it onto your application. If you're in the development stages of your application, we highly recommend that you do the update basically immediately and pick up the new version. If you already have a published application, we recommend that you create a new version of the application, update the libraries, do a bit of QA just to make sure everything still works as expected, and then you can publish with the new version. Our upgrade policy, which is in our documentation, we always support the current version plus 2 versions back, which means that right now you'll still be able to open and work and design and enhance applications if they are version 21.10 or higher. If you're currently using older versions of those client libraries, you would see the second screenshots that you see on this slide, basically urging you to upgrade. You need to click upgrade your application setting, upgrade with a click of a button. We recommend again upgrading directly to the latest version, and then you'll be able to continue to develop and enhance your application. One more thing that I mentioned in the last webcast, but I'll mention again here, the Alta-based user interfaces are still supported. Okay, Alta is basically what you will be using if you started development a couple of years ago, or if you picked up the Oracle SAS template. Okay, but Alta is planned to be removed from Oracle Jet in Oracle Jet version 13. So you still have about a year before this is going to impact you, okay? But you should start planning now. In terms of planning, what you should be doing, any new application that you develop should be based on the Redwood set of look and feel, either the Redwood or the stable theme that is based off Redwood, which allows you also to customize the look and feel. Okay. If you're currently on an Alta application and you know that you would want to further enhance the application in the future, we recommend allocating some time on your calendar to migrate this application to the Redwood look and feel. The Redwood look and feel is a bit different. It would require you probably to do some work on your UI in terms of arranging things on the page. So dedicate some time to do this transition at some point over the next year. Right, now that we talked about the logistics, let's talk about the new features and what's cool in Visual Builder. So one of the key things is a new template. It's the new Redwood responsive app and page template. So as I said, we're moving away from Alta. You've been able to develop Redwood-based application for a while in Visual Builder, but people wanted us to create a more impressive and more functional and more responsive template. And this is what you get with the new 2204 version. We basically implemented the same look and feel that you're going to see in the Oracle SAS applications that are using the Redwood. So you can basically have the similar look and feel to applications that we're building. It's the default look and feel for any new application that you're going to create in 2204. So when you're creating a new empty application, you don't need to pick up a specific template. If you're just picking up the default empty application, when you're creating a new web application, it's going to have this new look and feel. The templates that we developed, you have several templates for your page in terms of how you do navigation. So there's navigation on the side, as you can see here, or there's bottom navigation as well. The templates are also at the page level, where you're going to see this little header and the little line of color below that. And the templates are also built to be responsive and work properly on mobile devices. So they are automatically adapting to the size of your screen. Therefore, they are a very good template to start with if you're taking and building a web application that you're also targeting for mobile application and for creating progressive web apps that deploys on mobile devices. The templates come with a new shell page, and the shell page itself leverages the feature of fragments. Okay, so the shell page itself, you'll see a reference there to 2 fragments. The fragments represent the header and the footer, and it allows you to then modify those very easily by going over and modifying those fragments. Okay. And again, this user interface is aligned with the way that Oracle is building our next set of application, and it implements a lot of the best practices that we learn about usability for building applications. One key thing to note, we're not going to change any of your existing applications. If you already have an application that you're currently developing, it's going to stay with your existing UI template and what you already built. But any new application that you'll create is going to be able to pick up this new Redwood responsive UI. Going over from the UI, another big feature in the new version of Visual Builder is business objects on existing tables and views in a database. So this has been a long-standing feature that a customer requested us to add to Visual Builder, and that's basically the ability to take Visual Builder, point it to another database, and pick up tables from this database and create basically business objects on top of them, allowing you to very easily create your user interface with Visual Builder on top of existing tables and schemas in an Oracle database. Okay, so you're now able to do this with the new version 22.04 of Visual Builder. We call this feature Bring Your Own Schema. Okay, and it relies on a feature we had for a while called Bring Your Own Database. And basically, Visual Builder itself, when you spin up the service, comes with a built-in database. So when you're creating business objects, it creates it in this database. In order to use this feature, though, what you need is you need a standalone database, an Oracle database in the cloud outside of Visual Builder. This can be, for example, the Oracle ATP database or the Oracle Database Cloud Service. And you then set your Visual Builder instance to point to that database. And we're going to use that database instead of the built-in database that comes with Visual Builder. Then you'll be able to create new business objects that will create tables in that database. But you would also be able to now create business objects on top of tables that already exist in other schemas in this database. To do this, you would need to point Visual Builder and tell it which schemas you want to leverage in Visual Builder. Now, a couple of points about the business objects. This is the full capabilities of business object in terms of you get the full set of CRUD operation, create, read, update, delete on those tables and views. Okay. Beyond that, you get all the advanced functionality of the REST endpoints that we create, meaning you can do query by example. So you can do the filter criterion, you can do sorting, you can do pagination. So when we fetch the records, we fetch them in sets of records and not all the records in one go. And we also know how to manage relationship between objects. So everything that you're used to from working with business object applies on top of existing tables that you have in your database, including the ability to add your own business rules. Okay, so you can add your own layer in business objects of validations, functions, and triggers. One thing to know, this setting is at the app level. So when you're creating an application, you will decide whether you want to use existing schemas or you want to create the schema from Visual Builder and let Visual Builder manage it. An application can only have one of those two modes. You can't mix and match the two together in one application. Okay. So one of the key advantages of this is that because the tables are sitting in a separate database and the tables are in a schema that you control, you can access them freely with any tool that supports SQL access. Okay, any tool that can access the database can access those tables as well. You're not limited to just accessing them through Visual Builder and through the REST interface that we provide. Another advantage here is that you can leverage SQL functions as part of your work because you can leverage those functions inside view objects that you consume in Visual Builder. So it becomes possible, for example, to take and create a view object that uses a distinct clause, or that uses aggregations and group bys and calculations on your data, and expose that in a Visual Builder application. Okay, so again, for a lot of customers who've been using Business Object, those types of requirements were there for a while, and this is actually a solution that provides you a way to work with that. Okay. The other advantage here is, again, the whole life cycle of your database object is managed outside of Visual Builder. You have a fixed schema name throughout the development life cycle of your application, so it's going to be the same user in the database, same name for the table, and you can therefore, again, use external tools to access it and manage the data, import, export data into the database, do things like that. Okay. So again, just the key thing to remember, you're either using external tables or the built-in tables pair up in Visual Builder, but in a single instance, you can mix and match some applications that would use external tables, some of them would use internal tables. Okay. So let's break from the slides for a second here, and let's see a demo of those capabilities. So I'm going to switch over to Visual Builder over here, and I'm going to create a new 2204 sample application. So again, I'm choosing an empty application. I don't pick up any template, and I'm going to show you the Redwood template when I create a new web application. So you create a new web application, and the first thing you can see is that we do show you the various application navigation patterns over here. There's bottom tabs and there's side navigation. Okay, those are the two options here. Let's pick up the side navigation. We'll create a little HR application, and we'll have, let's say, customers here. Not an HR, we'll do a customers app. Okay, we'll have a customers section. We can have a countries section, and we can have another section over here. And again, you can add more or less items as you want. When you click finish, we create the application for you. In terms of the structure, you're going to see the 3 flows, one for each section of your application. And you're going to see in the root page, there's a shell page. In the fragments area, you're going to see the shell drawer, footer, and header. Okay, so the header is this line up here. The footer is this area down here. Okay, and the drawer is the part that pops up over here. So all this navigation is built in for you. And again, you can go over and you can modify things as you please. So for example, you can go over, open the shell header part and modify what it's gonna say over here. Okay, so if we switch back to design mode, you can click over here and say customers app. Okay, and that would apply, of course, in the pages that use that template if you do a refresh. So that's the basic template. And then inside the page, you can see this title over here and this line of color. Okay, if you're actually looking at the code, those things appear also in the code here. Okay, so this is the code of the page itself. Then in terms of development, you're free to continue to develop just like before by dragging and dropping component into the page. So for example, if we look up panels, you can drag and drop a panel over here, resize it, and drop another panel next to it, for example. Okay, so all of this is still development done just like before, but with a nice look and feel around it. All right. The other thing I wanted to show you is that this is again a responsive UI. So if we switch from a big screen into a small mobile device, you're going to see that the menu is basically the top menu is disappearing. The drawer is still up here on the left. Maybe I'll use another font that doesn't actually hide the top like that. And then you can see the drawer is still popping up on the left side, but the top menu is basically gone. You have a more condensed way to see your UI. The responsive also in terms of the 2 panels are now one below the other. If you switch your device over to be horizontal mode, you get your top bar back on, and the two panels are one next to the other. Okay. So again, this is our built-in responsive template. Again, this is one of them. There's another one with a bottom navigation. We'll look at that later on. The other thing I wanted to show you here is how do I work with external business object. To do that, you're going to go into your application settings. Okay. In the application setting, under business object, you're going to have the ability to choose a different schema. Okay. Now, in order to be able to choose this different schema, we'll go back into your instance settings. So to the Visual Builder server instance setting or tenant setting. Over here, you need to switch to an external database. In my case, I'm using the Autonomous Transaction Processing database. Okay. By default, it's going to be the default one, and you can click to use a different database. And then you also need to tell Visual Builder which schemas in that database you want people to be able to access. So this is the list of schemas here, and you can add new schemas just by clicking here and providing the name of another schema. So I have 3 schemas in the database that I'm allowing people to use. So if I go back to my application that we're building over here, and I look in the business object section, over here I would see the 3 schemas I can use. I'm going to use the shy schema to create business objects. Okay. The minute that I do that, if I now then go over and open the business object and I click to create a new business object, we get a new type of user interface. This user interface allows me to browse the tables and views that are inside this schema. Okay. And then I can pick up, for example, the countries table. Visual Builder is going to interrogate the data dictionary of the database, find out which columns are in this table, find out the properties of each one of them, which one is primary key, and show it over here. You can then, for example, modify things. So you can, for example, say we have the default title or label that would be shown. You can modify it just by going here. And again, this doesn't modify anything in the database. It just modifies the way that this field is represented inside Visual Builder. Okay. You can also change the field name, by the way, if you want here. So you can go and modify this to be called region. Okay. You can also indicate whether this is a required field or not. All right. So let's create this mapping on top of the countries table. And again, now you can go over to the data, and you'll see all the data coming from the database. You have all the REST endpoints to do all the operations on the table. Okay. And you can, of course, define business rules, security, and more. In terms of fields, you can't add a new field into the database. If you want to do this, you need to do it in the database tools. But you can add fields that are based on a formula or a field that are based on other columns, so calculations on existing columns. Okay, but you can't create a new, completely new field in the table. To do that, again, your whole life cycle is managed directly in the database. So use the database tool to do that. Let's add one more table, one more business object actually into our application. We'll add the customers table. Okay. And again, this is basically going over, picking up the information from the data dictionary. We have a lot of fields over here, and we're going to click create. Now, one of the things you'll see is that we now recognize the relationship between customers and countries. So each countries can have multiple customers in that country. Again, you can go and look at the relationship, and this relationship is being picked up from the data dictionary in the Oracle database because we have primary foreign key relationship between the tables. Okay. I'm also going to show you that you can add, when you click new business object, you can also add views. So views have a little different icon next to them. It's not like the table icon, it's a view icon, and you can pick up a view object and base a business object on top of it. Now, in this view object, for example, we don't have a primary key in the database defined, like we don't have a primary key defined in the database. This, for example, is a view object that goes over 2 tables, does a summary of the total of sales in the sales table, pick up the customer name from the customer table, does a join between them, does a group by, basically uses the full power of SQL and creates a view object, and we can then bring it into Visual Builder. We need to have a primary key field in order for Visual Builder to be able to do things like query a specific records or update a specific record. So now we also have a view object in our environment. Okay. Just like before, you can go over and modify and add business rules and things like that over here.
Shai, we have a question from a customer.
Sure.
Is the schema handled like for the business objects today? You have one for live, stage, and development.
Yeah.
The question is this handled the same way with the custom?
No. So one of the things here is that, again, this is a fixed schema. So the same schema is being used throughout the life cycle of the application. You can, however, switch it manually. So if you actually look at the source code of our application and you look in the business object, there's a file here called business object JSON, where we have the name of the schema in the database that we're using. So if I wanted to take this application and deploy it on top of a different schema, I can, assuming that the table structure over there in the database is the same, I can just change the value over here to point to a different schema, and it would work on that one. Okay. One thing that we are working on for a future version is introducing this concept of different databases for the lifecycle, different database connections, using the concept of profiles, application profiles. This is not available in the current version. This is something that is planned for an upcoming version. Right.
Thank you.
Now that we have the business object, we can bind our page to it. Okay, and so just like before, you can, for example, pick up a select component. Let's pick up a select component, put it, let's say, up here. Okay, and map the options to come from a business object. Okay, so we're looking at countries, for example. Okay, so we want to show the name of the country. Okay, and the country ID would be the value. Okay. So now if we pop this up, we get all the countries from our database. Right? Then just like before, you can take the value from here and store it, for example, in a new variable. So we'll do a new variable, selected country ID. Okay, and this could be number. Right. Then we can use not just UI component first, we can also use data first. So this is the data palette. Again, if you weren't here last month, over here we see all our business objects. And if I want to show, for example, information about one of those countries, I can drag and drop countries, drop it over here, okay, and create, for example, a detail form. Okay, note that I can use the dynamic components or my regular jet components, which is what I'm going to do here. Pick up the information you want to show, pick up the region. Again, note the name of the field as I specified it when I created the business object. And then we need to say which country information we want to show. This is, of course, the country that we chose in our list. So we'll map this variable over like that. Click Finish. Okay. And now if we switch to live mode, we can pick up a country and we can get the details about this country. Okay. As I said, when we're working with business object, you still have this concept of relationship. So if you actually expand the countries over here, you can see that each country has multiple customers, right? So we can take the customers and drag and drop it again over to the right side. This time we can drop it, for example, as a table. Okay, and again, choose what we want to show here. Maybe show the name of the customer, and we can show which city they're in. Okay, show also the last name. Reposition things and click next. Okay, just like before, you can also use filter criterion. So you can actually filter things on the business object. Doesn't matter. And you can also, of course, say, okay, which country's customer you want to show, because we're doing the relationship. So it's the same country we selected at the top. Bring this over here. And we can now, again, switch to live mode, pick up a country, okay, and see all the customers in there. Maybe make this table a little bit bigger. Okay, and switch to another country, okay, and get all the customers in that country. So again, in terms of development, just like you did before, in terms of business object, all the same functionality of binding, filtering, relationships, fetching data as needed, okay, doing pagination, all of this exists here. So if I actually take this table and set the style here to a specific height, like that, you would see that I'm actually fetching records as needed. If I pick up Singapore, okay, as I scroll down, I'm fetching more and more records in pagination mode. Okay. So a little bit about the, again, like the nice Redwood template makes your pages look a little bit more professional. Again, if you run your application now, you'll have the responsive behavior, and you can also enable PWA on your application if you want to. Okay, so if we take this application, make it smaller, we then get the two things one below the other. The menu is still up here, so you can switch to the other tabs in your application, which right now don't have any information, or go back and again pick up a different country, okay, and get the data. All right. Let's go back to the slides. Let's cover some more features. So there's a bunch of other enhancements on business object, even if you're not using the external business object, external table, sorry. One of the things is the ability to specify an alternative field to be the primary key for a business object when you're importing data from an external file to create the business object. So again, this is a request we've heard from several customers. Those are situations in a lot of cases where your data is coming from an external system. In that external system, the data has a primary key, and you want to keep that primary key when you're using business objects, so you can do things like update by this primary key or access a record by this primary key directly. For all the CRUD operations. Now, up until now, Visual Builder would have maintained its own ID field. Now you can tell Visual Builder, I don't need your ID field. Instead, I want you to use this specific field as the new ID field. Visual Builder would use that for the identification of a record. We also automatically manage increasing that number field as you add more records using database sequence, just like before. Okay, so we create the sequence based on your existing number field and starting from the maximum value that is in that field. Another request that customers have asked us, especially customers that have been using the external database and wanted to know which database schema is storing the specific tables that we're creating in Visual Builder. We now show this information in your application when you're looking at that business object section. So you can see the name of the schema being used for each part of your life cycle. Okay. We also added one more thing, which is if you have errors in the definition of a field in your business object, it's going to be underlined in red when you're creating it. So let me show you some of those features. We're going to create a new application for that. Create a sample 2 application. Again, we're starting from an empty application, but we're going to create a new web application. This time we're going to choose the bottom navigation part. Okay, we'll create a little movies application, and maybe we want to have like movies here and actors, for example, and again, like another thing down here. Okay. So again, when you're creating the application, you're going to see at the bottom of the page, we're going to have the navigation items. Okay, this is a pattern that is quite popular, especially in mobile applications. Okay, and just having the things down here at the bottom, which allows you to navigate between the areas of your page. All right, now let's use business object again. This time when I click business object, it's going to create a new one in the built-in, basically managed by Visual Builder. So It's not mapped to an external database. So one of the things I can do is I can say, okay, I want, using my data manager, to create a business object based on an Excel spreadsheet. So I'm going to pick up a spreadsheet from my laptop. Okay. One new feature here is the ability to specify a new character encoding when you're importing. We're going to just keep the default, so we'll do an upload. We're understanding the structure of the datasheet. We have one datasheet with a list of movies, and then we can see the movies. Now again, by default, we have an ID field over here marked as the primary key. This is what we're going to create and generate for you. But if you don't want to use that one, you can basically say, I am actually interested in using, let's say, the position field over here as the primary key. You can see we then removed the indication from the ID field. Okay, and this field is going to be your primary key going forward. Now, this field needs to be a numeric field. So it can be, for example, also the popularity or the rating, for example, over here. But again, what you want is you want a value that is unique. Okay, we'll click finish. This will take the Excel spreadsheet, import it into a new table inside the Oracle database. And now we have the table information over here. If we look at the fields, okay, all the fields are still here. We still have the ID field over here, okay, but you can delete it if you want to. Okay. You don't need it anymore because you have another field that is being used as the way to fetch information. So all your endpoints, for example, when you do a get one, the field, the parameter that you're going to pass here is going to be the new ID field that you specified. One more thing to note here is, again, if you go over to your application setting and you look under business object, you would now see which schema in the Oracle database is hosting those tables that you're creating here. So right now we just develop the application, so we have a development schema. If I'll stage the application, we'll have a different schema for the stage. Right. And then in terms of development, you can still use the same process as before to build your application. Right. Oh, we wanted to show you potentially like the error in a field. So if I go over to movies, field, again, I can add another field here because this is managed by Visual Builder. So I can add, for example, like the size of the audience, and I can put it as a numeric field. Okay. And then I can say maximum digits, 39, for example. Okay. Now, 39 is not a valid value, which is highlighted here. But even if I don't look here, I can see this highlighting over here showing me, hey, you have an issue with this field. And then I can go over and look up what exactly is the issue over there and then fix it. Okay, so this is the other feature that is new in Visual Builder. All right, bunch of other enhancement, moving away from business object. One of the things is in the JavaScript editor in your application. We now have code insight into language structure. So again, if you're like me, you're not a JavaScript expert. Every time that I need to figure out how do I do a loop in JavaScript, first I Google, pick up how you do a loop, and then I bring it in. Now it becomes a lot easier. Inside your editor, you can actually get code insight into JavaScript structure. Okay. One other thing, we're now automatically creating a new function using the ES6 syntax. So page functions or module functions in page, flow, or applications are created with this simpler syntax that you're seeing over here. You don't need anymore the page module prototype to define the function. Okay. Everything that you had, it's still working, but new functions are going to be cleaner in terms of how they show up. We did a bunch of enhancement for dynamic components in the application. I don't know if you're using dynamic components or not. If you're not familiar with dynamic components, again, an Office Hour webcast that we did several months ago covered those when we first introduced them. So you might want to go back and look at that. Basically, dynamic components allow you to dynamically change what fields are you showing in forms or in tables or in lists or even just parts of the layouts, based on all sorts of conditions. They are very useful, for example, when you're building a mobile application or an application that also shows up on a mobile device and you want to modify the layout based on that. You can also modify things based on the role that the user is based on and other conditions that you can define. So up until now, those dynamic components were separate components from the component palette that you need to manually add to your application. But from now on, every new application that you create automatically has access to those dynamic components. They are integrated into the component palette in Visual Builder. This is the reason, for example, that when I drag in the data palette something over to the page, I can create, for example, forms that are based on the dynamic or the static form, for example. Okay. Few other features that we added: the ability to choose which layout I'm looking at in the preview directly by picking up a property. This is the first thing that you're seeing here. This makes it easier to see how different UIs are going to look when you modify them. And when you're picking up fields for the condition, they are grouped now based on logic. So you have like the responsive fields and the role-related fields and the fields that relate to values sorted out there in a more easily accessed way. We added the ability to define the user assistant density to your forms, controlling the spacing over there. You can directly edit dynamic containers and templates in the page editor, so you don't need to switch over to look at them in order to edit them. And we also support now the inclusion of fragments inside dynamic containers, making it again easier to build reusability into your application, even when you're using dynamic components. So again, if we want to look a little bit about dynamic components in our application, if we go to the page that we have over here, we can pick up our business object of movies and we can drag and drop it into the page. Okay, so when we drag and drop it into the page, we can drop it as one of our dynamic components. Okay, so actually, before we drop this thing, let's bring in an input text component. So put it up here. This would be our movie ID. Okay, and then we'll store it in a movie ID field. Okay, search ID field, we'll call this one. And then we can bring in the movies, drop it over here, for example, as a dynamic, we'll do a dynamic details form in this case. Okay. So again, the nice thing about dynamic forms is that it allows you to choose which fields are going to be there. Okay, so we'll call it the movie form. Okay, and we can choose to show, for example, the title and the year and the rating and the position, popularity, for example, and an image, for example. Okay, and then click next. The movie ID would be whatever we search for. So we'll do this mapping over here. Finish. And now if we switch to live mode, when our page shows up, you can put in a movie ID and get information about this movie. Okay, like that. Now, the nice thing again about dynamic layouts is that I can define different rules about how they're going to show up. So this is, for example, what I'm going to show in, let's say, a web application. But maybe when I'm on a mobile device, I want to show a different set of fields. So I'm going to take the default rule, I'm going to duplicate it, I'm going to create a mobile set of rules for how those would show up in a mobile. Then I can add a condition. So again, as I said before, I can access each one of the fields and do a condition based on the value of the fields. I can access responsive aspects. I can access user role aspects. Okay. In our case, we're going to say on a small device, if the device is small, okay, we're going to do a mobile layout. So the mobile layout, we can go over here and we can say, hey, you know what? We actually don't want so much information. We just want the name of the movie and maybe the image of the movie. Okay, like that. Okay, so this would be our mobile. By the way, if we're working on a mobile here on this field, we probably want to show it not as a text, but rather as a picture. So we're going to pick up and define a new template for this field. Okay, so we have the default template, and we can pick up a different component here. For example, we can pick up the avatar component and bring it here. Okay, we just wanted to show the same information that we're showing here. So the same value is going to be available for the avatar. Okay, so click the avatar, set the data to be the same information. Now, one of the things about, again, we upgrade to Jet 11, so Avatar has a bunch of other capabilities, like you can define a default background color. You can define the shape of an avatar. So remember that when you're upgrading to newer versions of the product, a newer version of Jet are becoming available, you can leverage those in your application. Okay, so now if we look back on our screen over here, okay, switch over to live mode, put in a movie ID, we can now see the image over here. This is how it's going to look like on a big device. And in order to look at a small device, previously we just needed to go over here and say, okay, when we're a small device, we're just saying 2 fields. Okay. Now, the nice thing here is that you can also do this directly from here. You can say, okay, how would it look on a mobile device? And then you can see this layout versus this layout. So you can basically define which layout you're seeing at runtime. And so that's one aspect here. The other aspect, again, is if you want dynamic content on your page, you can also do that using the dynamic container. So the dynamic components are all in your component palette. You can pick up a dynamic container, put it over here, and then define what's going to be inside this dynamic component. Okay, so again, we can say case 1 and case 2, and for each one, we can create a template for what's going to be in there. Okay, so for example, we can say, put in some heading, okay, that says big screen. Like that. And then when you navigate back to the page, this is what's going to show here on big condition. We can add another case that says, okay, we have a condition here. Actually, we'll do it like this. The condition is if we're on a small screen. So we'll go again to the system preferences, responsive, and we say if we're on a small screen, okay, we're going to show something else. Small screen, we'll have another template. A small template. Okay, and we can modify that one. So over here, we're going to have a little title. So we're going to say small screen, okay, and make it smaller like that. Then you can go back. And again, based on the device that you're working on, this is on the big screen. If you switch to a smaller device, okay, it becomes small screen. Now, one of the things that, again, are nice is that if you want to edit this template, you no longer just need to go over there. You can just directly click on it and then edit it for here. Okay, like that. Okay, so it makes it a lot easier to go and work directly on your areas and modify them from here. So this is a little bit about the new dynamic components capabilities. All right, few other new features. You can now add a customized lock screen to your application. So, you know, sometimes you need to lock your application. Maybe you're doing some updates on your business object or doing some other things. Up until now, when your application is in the lock mode, customers would see a screen that we created. Now you can create your own lock screen with your own message that would show up, bring it and import it into your application and show it over there. You can now move items to different slots in your application directly in the property inspector. So you don't need to just drag and drop them to an exact location in your application. You can just move them to other slots directly from the property inspector. Action chain testings. Okay, so hopefully you all know that when you define an action chain, you can also define test scenarios that would run on it and verify that it works properly. If you're not, look up the concept of automated testing for action chain. This helps you create a test-driven development approach. It's a unique capability of Visual Builder. Those tests can now run in the background while you're not doing anything. They can actually recognize that you changed something in your action chain and run the tests for that specific action chain automatically for you. There's also a new nice user interface for seeing the results. There's a run all button that runs and then will just show you the things that fail, making it easier to locate the problematic areas. So again, a few enhancements to action tests. If it's a feature that not many people are using. We use it extensively inside Oracle to make sure that the applications that we deliver are safe and are basically, when we do changes, we don't break things. We practice a lot of this concept of test-driven development. You should check it out as well. One other big feature for people who are using REST services, when you're using a REST service now, you can actually use parameters as part of the server definition itself. Okay, so if we have, let me see if I have here a link to a REST service, and let's pick up, for example, this URL. Okay, and if I were to go over to Visual Builder, define a connection to REST service by endpoint. Up until now, I could have used parameters over here in the path, but I can also introduce parameter into the server itself. So even the server name can be a parameter. Okay. This one actually gets one. Okay. And then you would see in the server, we now have the name for a parameter, and you can then specify a value. You can actually create a set of multiple values that will be here. So this one, and maybe you have a REST too. Okay, if you have another server. Okay, and you can also do this for other parts. So you can, for example, we have a version here. We can specify the version to be also a parameter. Okay, and then this one will come here. And you can then have V2, or I think they also have a V3 option here. Okay. And then you can dynamically change it when you run your application or when you test. For example, if I test now, you can see I have the variable for which country I want to get information for, but I can also get variables over here for the server name and the version. So if I do a test, this is version 2 and the format for version 2. I can also specify I want to see version 3 here, and you'll see when I do a test, the information comes in a little bit different layout. So those are server URL path parameters that you can define in Visual Builder as well. And those are most of the major features in the new version. We're just about to end our presentation for today. Of course, if you want to learn more about any of those features, our documentation has a section about new features with links to the specific doc on each one of those new features and a couple more new features that I didn't have time to cover today. If you have questions on any of those features, we have our Cloud Customer Connect forum. If you're not there, you should just go to Cloud Customer Connect, pick up, basically you need to create a user there, indicate that you're interested in the application development area, and then you'll have access to our Visual Builder and our Visual Builder Studio forums. We are posting about those new features in our blog. Last week, we published a post that covers the high level of the features, and we are starting to publish new blogs about the new features in details, starting this week with an entry about the business object on external tables. Again, blogs.oracle.com/VBCS. We have an RSS feed if you want to track it over there. I'm also on my personal Twitter account. I publish every time that I have a new blog over there or any other new item related to Visual Builder. And if you're on LinkedIn, there's a visual builder group over there. Join this group and you'll hear about all the upcoming seminars, all the new blog entries, every new feature that is introduced. We're covering over there with technical posts on our group. There's other people, for example, posting their experience, and there's also, of course, job positions over there that are being posted. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Let's see if we have any open questions right now. I see that Murtaza and Laura have been quite busy answering questions. I don't see any open questions that are still unanswered. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We'll see you next month with another office hour about some of the new features in more in-depth. Thanks, and hope to see you soon. Bye.